we were commissioned to facilitate strategic engagement on resilience with 10 equality partners. There were 4 key aims of the research that we're undertaking. The first aim was around, we need the next slide, if that's possible. Yeah, brilliant. The first aim was around understanding engagement, how to sustain engagement of equality organisations in resilience. From what Millie was saying at the beginning, we know systemically marginalised communities are disproportionately impacted by crisis, yet we also know that the levels of engagement could benefit from being a lot stronger. So we were looking at how to sustain that engagement, how to strengthen partnerships of equality partners so that they can sit around the table with decision makers around resilience. Part of the work was also about building knowledge and understanding with equality partners of what's going on around resilience, and also with some of the strategic organisations involved in resilience for them to have more of a deeper understanding around what equality organisations are doing around this space. The centre of the research essentially was working with 10 equality partners. We can go on to the next slide, please. So we engaged with these 10 equality partners, and our role was very much about engaging with them, drawing on their insights and reflections, and really trying to kind of pull those together and amplify them as much as possible. And I know some of the partners are in the room as well, so we welcome you and any further comments that you can add. If we can go on to the next slide, methodology.
I'll say a little bit about the methods. We're going to go fairly quickly through this bit and focus on our conclusions and recommendations. But the project took place between August 2023 and March 2024. We did some initial scoping, background information, looking at key documents, and spent a bit of time recruiting those 10 equality partner organizations. So we did some in-depth one-on-one interviews with each of those organizations. And then we did 2 half-day workshops that were also a bit of a deeper dive. Those happened in November. And then, of course, we did analysis and looked at workshop feedback and all of that. I want to also mention that each participating organization received a stipend for their involvement after attending the workshops. And then also just want to mention some of the definitions that we've used, because we want to sort of practice what we preach a little bit. So when we talk about, we've used certain definitions, and please do go to the research report. There's a lot more detail there. But in terms of the definitions we used, in summary, resilience we took to mean the ability of institutions and communities to work together to prevent, handle, then recover and learn from disruption and adapt to change. We used some of the definitions that are out there, and we've got, I can point you to all of these, but by an emergency, we mean an event or a situation which threatens serious damage to human welfare in a place. And then the aims of community resilience are about taking a participatory approach to managing emergencies. Resilience to emergencies is about the community being aware of risks that might impact them, and then taking action to plan and prepare, respond, and recover from those emergencies. That's from the Cabinet Office Community Resilience Development Framework from 2019. We refer to the equality partners as those 10 organizations that Paul mentioned that were engaged in the research, and then equality organizations refers to the wider category of equality organizations that are operating in the London voluntary sector. And of course, the voluntary sector is voluntary community and social enterprise sector is distinct from the public and private sectors. And we also talk a bit about infrastructure organizations and equality infrastructure organizations. And that refers to the organizations that exist to support and develop, coordinate, represent, and promote frontline voluntary sector organizations to help them deliver their aims more effectively. So with that, I think, Paul, you're going to talk a little bit about the themes that emerged throughout
Yeah.
the project, and I'll chip in a
Sure.
second.
So in terms of the emerging themes, we broke these down into different areas. So the first theme, which is why Kim kind of went through that whole explanation previously, was around the kind of the community resilience. We called it the ecosystem. Essentially, what we mean by that is having a shared understanding of resilience, because a recurring theme through the work that we did is there wasn't a shared understanding and clarity, a collective understanding of what is meant by community resilience. And this was particularly concerning for the systemically marginalized groups, because a large proportion of their works, as already been mentioned, a large portion of their work is already centered around building resilience around social economic shocks, but their work currently appears disconnected from the current resilient structures and work. And essentially, there's a kind of lack of consensus around what the definition is, and the absence of a shared definition impedes the possibility of a unified collective approach around resilience. So there's something about understanding of what it is. The second aspect in relation to the ecosystem is around the structures being complex, the resilient structures in London being very complex, and they're further complicated by a lack of understanding of the kind of activities and approaches within community resilience. And that all impacts on the ability for equality organisations to engage. That's further exacerbated by the fact that also decision-making processes in relation to resilience lack clarity for equality partners. And this makes it challenging to navigate the different roles and responsibilities that organisations play within the existing resilience structures. The other thing is around LCEP, which sits within the Resilience Forum, and its structures, purposes, aims, and membership also appear unclear to equality partners. So there's a whole area also around kind of accessibility, language, and decision-making. And in terms of communication and clear messaging is something that's really important. And also in relation to LCEP to kind of clarify how it meets the needs of its members. Essentially, what we're saying is kind of a more cohesive approach built upon a shared understanding of resilience with clear structures has the potential to amplify the voices of equality partners and also the wider VCS organisations.
So shall I jump in here, Paul?
Sure.
So some of the other themes that were, sorry, if you can just go back one slide. Yeah, want to just mention the voluntary and community sector, particularly the role of equality partners and then engaging those equality partners. So we know that equality organizations are a key part of the London voluntary sector. They play a vital role in direct work with communities around community resilience. Ongoing resilience work is about responding to community need, including things like the cost of living crisis and working to avert the climate emergency. Some of the other themes emerging, we know that the voluntary sector is very good at supporting communities and engaging in long-term support, engaging that support through the long term. And that offers the potential to complement some of the short-term crisis intervention work that happens by emergency responders. The sector is built on relationships and trust. It's driven by strong values and an approach that is often embedded in communities. We know that equality organizations hold invaluable insights into specific needs of specific communities, offering a wealth of information to resilience partners. This could be incredibly useful in planning responses to emergencies and for prevention strategies. Recognizing and connecting to that ongoing resilience work with communities by the voluntary sector is really crucial, but we do need to sort of bridge the gap between the existing community resilience support provided by equality organizations that's already been happening, has been happening, and continues to happen, with some of the more formal resilience strategies and support led by the statutory sector. So it's partly about valuing and acknowledging some of that existing work that's already taking place. And then in terms of engaging equality partners, we know there are lots of challenges to engaging equality organizations to resilient structures. A lot of this is about resource constraints. I think there's a lot of threads here to the previous speakers. Resource constraints and capacity limitations are significant challenges for voluntary sector organizations generally, and much more acutely for equality organizations. So these capacity issues present a challenge, and of course have become even more difficult since COVID, with increasing demands and complex needs matched with shrinking public resources. So equality partners are often left to feel like they're left to pick up the pieces with little or no acknowledgement or support. That lack of funding to engage certainly hinders their ability to engage in resilient structures. So despite those challenges, though, the voluntary sector remains an active participant in emergency planning and resilience work. Their continuous engagement with communities, addressing various needs is really the backbone of community resilience. So leveraging their expertise and insights and deep-rooted connections within communities is really necessary to bolstering overall resilience initiatives. And then lastly, obviously there's a real commitment from the voluntary sector to values, to sustained community engagement, and a deep understanding of local needs. And that just makes it really an indispensable asset in building community resilience. So recognizing, supporting, and integrating equality organizations into formal resilience structures would greatly enhance the collective capacity to tackle those challenges and build stronger, more resilient communities. So those were the themes coming out from that. I think, Paul, you're going to talk a little bit about the themes from the public sector.
Okay.
Slide, please. Oh, sorry. No, that's me, Paul. Sorry. We got our slides mixed up here. Let me mention these themes. So of course the public sector have their legal duties around this and play a key role in building resilience across London. And more recently, there has been sort of greater recognition that voluntary sector organizations and including equality groups specifically are a really important partner in this work. But of course, we know that there are many, many barriers that are faced by equality partners that hinder access to resilient structures. So the use of jargon came out as a big theme. It's a barrier. And we need to really make our language and what we're doing and how we're talking about it more accessible and inclusive. There was also, though, a lack of clarity about roles and responsibilities in the realm of in this kind of resilience ecosystem. And who the decision makers are, and where the power resides, and how we manage that power. It's also really important, we heard, not to take an extractive approach to working with equality organizations, but instead to sort of invite those organizations to collaborate on a more equal and respectful footing. And then the need to learn from past events came out very strongly as a theme. That's exemplified, of course, by some of the lessons drawn from the Grenfell Tower fire tragedy. So the need to capture and integrate learnings into future resilience work. There is clearly a need for a long-term approach and a commitment to support the community in as effective recovery as possible. Wanted to share with you a couple of these quick quotes here that you can see on the screen. True engagement means co-production. It's not a tick box exercise. These are from the equality partner participants. Many people in our communities, particularly those in the global majority, will not go to the police or the doctors. There is fear and a lack of trust. So I will now hand back over to Paul to talk about our conclusions.
Yeah, so conclusions, recommendations. I'm aware
we've only got a couple minutes left.
5 minutes, I know. So just very quickly, in terms of our reflections, we had some kind of broad reflections, which has already been mentioned largely, but essentially one of them was around that in order to sustain engagement of equality organisations, it's important to support their wider organisational needs. I think it's already been mentioned, the point around organisations in communities are invested for the long term, not just around a particular crisis or a hazard. So that's really important. It's really important to sustain engagement, needs resources. And it's also really important to be open and transparent about power and where that sits within the resilient structures and where decisions are made. We're also, a reflection was that the current system is not always joined up, particularly between equality organisations and the public sector. So a joined up thinking and approach is really needed. The second thing is around building knowledge and understanding of resilience. So that's about clarity, which we've talked about in relation to community resilience. And the third is about building strategic understanding of equality partners' needs and capacity within LCEP and the Resilience Forum. So very much strategic understanding of equality partners' needs would be a good place for resilience partners to understand the role and expectations and value their contribution. Okay, let's move on then to the recommendations.
If we go to the next slide, thanks. So we had 6 key recommendations from this piece of research. I'm going to talk about the first 3, and then Paul will talk about the last 3. I know we don't have time to go into all the detail, but you will find lots more detail in our research report, so please have a look at that. The first is really about supporting equality organizations to engage their members and their networks in the London Resilience Forum. So that included recommending that the London Resilience Forum create and establish an equality sector panel. We've suggested that the GLA should resource that with a secretariat function and look at wider support needs. And getting those equality partners to engage in that panel and cascade the information about resilience down through their memberships and networks, and supporting that through the London Resilience Forum and LCEP, and also getting all of these resilience partners to deepen their understanding of equality partners' resilience work, because that work has been done, continues to be done, and I think sometimes becomes invisible to some of the public sector partners. So that's the first recommendation. The second one is about creating more opportunities for joined up working and partnerships. So this is about the GLA, LCEP, and the wider London funders to support equality organizations to access resources and funding to enable them to effectively engage in resilience work. And getting the London Resilience Forum, local authorities, and the GLA to explore how to connect resilience work in and across communities with emergency planning at a local level. I'd be really interested to hear people's views on that, whether they're already doing that or how they might do that. And then the last one is to develop a shared understanding of community resilience. We really found in this research that there is a very, wide, lots of different ideas about what that looks like and what that means. So we've recommended that LCEP develop a shared understanding and approach of what is meant by community resilience, specifically within the voluntary sector. I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to hand over to Paul for the last 3.
Okay, I'll whiz through these. We don't want to eat into the Q&A time. So the fourth one is around, it's really in relation to LCEP and its aims, roles, and member engagement. It goes back to the point from speaking to equality partners, not really understanding what LCEP is and its role. So really important for LCEP to communicate its vision, aims, and outcomes, as well as the wider London resilience structures and its roles within them. Also, other points in relation to LCEP is being really clear about how equality organisations can engage in structures by becoming an LCEP member, and also kind of strengthen some of the coordination and communication and trust building across the wider sector as well, to keeping organisations really informed and updated as to the work that they're doing, so that information can be cascaded further down. The fifth recommendation was around the whole area of communication, being much more inclusive and accessible, thinking about language, thinking about jargon. So all of those things are really important. The other thing that's recommended is around understanding the capabilities and sharing data and capturing learning. Again, that's already been mentioned, but what we're recommending is that the Resilience Forum and LCEP should include the capabilities of equality organisations in their next update of the voluntary sector response capability framework. So they're very much starting to kind of embed that in, and really trying to understand the capabilities of equality organisations and include that in some of the information that they're producing. There's also, building on that, a need or an opportunity for LCEP to explore ways that they can share data and information across LCEP members, including equality organisations. So how best to share information without compromising GDPR. And that might be about community needs, mapping, building an evidence base of what's going on. And lastly, that the Resilience Forum should ensure risk is communicated in an accessible way, so that, as Kim mentioned before, learning from past incidents is shared across equality organisations and the wider sector.
Shall I just wrap up with our final couple of slides? Yeah, well, just we actually wanted to put some questions out there for discussion potentially. These are a little bit wider than our specific research, but around, you know, how can some of the people on this workshop, how can we engage better with equality organizations in the area that you're working in? How can we build that shared understanding and approach and way of working around community resilience in your borough, in your local area? Are there some examples of good practice out there that would be helpful to share? And then lastly, just a bigger question of who owns the resilience space, you know, in your area? Who are the decision makers? Where is the power? And just last slide, Emily, thank you, is just, you can find this report, the research report that we did on the LCEP website. But you feel free to get in touch with us if you've got any questions or follow-up.